Nor do we endorse any candidates. So that's our disclaimer. We are hosting this forum to provide information about the candidates to the general public. Since this is a public information forum and not a campaign event, we respectfully request that all candidates and audience members refrain from applause or comments that could cause a disruption during this live broadcast forum. I'm joined tonight by Dan Weber, who is also a member of the Government Relations Committee. He'll be the timekeeper, and he will provide the candidates with a signal when you have 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts or comments. When you see the red signal, that means you have gone over the time limit and should stop immediately. Each candidate will answer the same questions. We will rotate the order of who answers the question first, second, etc. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question asked. At the end, we'll give you 2 minutes to wrap up your thoughts or cover any topics that may not have been asked tonight. So we have a very full hour, and therefore I'm going to take some time to introduce each one of you. Do you have any questions before we do that? Great. All right, we'll get started. So tonight we have Diane Nguyen, Eric Lucero, Sonja Buckmeier, Walter Hdson, Chad Hobot, and Paul Novotny. So welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's kick it off. The first question is around priorities. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us your top priorities and why you are running for this office. And again, you have 2 minutes. I'm going to start with Diane.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm Diane Nguyen, running for Minnesota State Senator for our district here. And I want to start with a quote from our memory of the late Justice Ginsburg. I'm here because I want to fight for things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. As a leader in the Minnesota State Senate, I will be the voice for the voiceless. I will fund education and free meals for all students, provide mental health support by funding facilities, and I am for protecting women's right to safe and legal reproductive health care. I want to propose a tax cut on Social Security tax for retirees, and it doesn't make sense, and we need common sense in the Minnesota State Senate. These are goals that are important to me because it represents the needs of our state and not for special interest groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the Elk River Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. Thank you for a very packed room. I don't recall a room being filled to the brim here like it is in past years. So thank you, everybody, for coming out. It is a very important election and civic duty to obviously engage in our ability to choose our leaders. It's a blessing we have in this great country and state. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve as state representative the last 8 years. And if I am given the privilege of continuing on as the next senator for our area, some of the priorities include, or I should say are guided by what I have been interacting with all summer long. Crisscrossing, door knocking, talking to constituents, neighbors, attending events, and hearing the feedback, listening to the voices, the values and priorities of our community. And the reoccurring themes that I continue to hear include the concern over skyrocketing crime. People are very frustrated at what's happened these last several years, the calls to defund the police, demoralizing the professional men and women in law enforcement that has emboldened criminals. And we've seen the results, skyrocketing crime. Another reoccurring theme includes election integrity. People are very concerned about making sure that their vote counts. Democrat, independent, Republican. Every single one of us expects and deserves to have the confidence in the integrity of our election system. Another is the skyrocketing prices of gas, groceries, and inflation. Every time somebody's filling up, every time somebody's making the eggs and milk purchases, they're seeing the direct results of the failed policies of the Biden-Walz administration. It's eroding the buying power and the lifestyles ability of people to maintain. So those are among the priorities I'm going to focus on. In that case, tax cuts to help. Thank you.
Sonja?
Okay. Good evening. My name is Sonja Buckmeier, and I'm running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this forum. I'm a mother and active community member in St. Michael. My husband and I decided to build our home and raise our 4 kids here because it felt familiar and it felt like home. Over the last 25 years, we have come to care deeply about our community, and that is why I am running for the Minnesota House. We're in a crucial moment right now where decisions are being made that will have profound and long-lasting effects on our state. I see the division. I see the challenges families are facing, like the lack of access to health care and mental health resources. I see our school district being forced to make cuts. I see the effects of climate change, from drought to changing crop seasons. We deserve better. I like to see us get back to single subject legislation since the state government ended this session again in gridlock. I also see this as an area that Mr. Hdson and I, along with all Minnesotans, have common ground. But without clarity, common ground, and compassion, we cannot be better. We are extremely exhausted by the division and the hateful rhetoric. I will be the leader who is committed to thoughtful policy making. I will represent all of us. We need compassion from our leaders, a basic decency and reason, and that is what I will bring to the Capitol. It is time we put people before politics. If elected, my top priorities would be to advocate for the right to feel safe in our communities, the right to an education, and the right to accessible health care. I will work to enact common sense gun laws, to increase investment in law enforcement and first responders. This includes recruiting and training new officers and personnel best equipped to meet our needs. I will vote to protect the right to choose. Thank you.
My name is Walter Hdson. I'm a current city council member in Albertville. I've served there a cumulative 7 years. Parallel to that, I've also been an activist in conservative circles, a commentator, had a radio show for a little while. And so I've had a lot of experience with rabble rousing and getting the blood pressure up with rhetoric. But this is a different profession, a different endeavor. Here you have to be willing to listen to people and have conversations and try to arrive at common ground. And I'm prepared to do that. That's why one of my top priorities, the top priority, and the top priority of the caucus, based upon the conversations I've had with current members and candidates, is to change the way that legislation gets made down in St. Paul. The division that has been spoken of, a lot of that is a byproduct of a process that elevates the stakes of the outcome by taking these single subject good ideas or bad ideas and wrapping them up into these giant, monstrous omnibus bills that present legislators at the end of the session with a choice between having government or not. And if they choose to have it, it's going to come along with a lot of baggage that they do not need, or that we do not need. And so we need to change that process, and we're going to. We're going to go back to having single subject bills, and what that's going to do is it's going to force conversations about ideas, and it's going to engage people back into the process. It's going to fulfill that slogan of putting people over politics. In terms of issues I want to focus on, I'll just cover two in the time remaining. Educational choice. Parents should have control over the child's education. They should control the dollars that go along with it. And public safety. We need to get serious about getting violent criminals off the street.
Thanks, Walter. My name's Chad Hobot. I'm running to be your state representative for Elk River, Otsego, Oak Grove, now then. There's a lot of worthy topics to address today, but I'll share 4 of them that I've recently heard from voters on. First, I'd like to help lower property taxes by supporting the bonding bill in the next biennium. The bonding bill helps us pay for our local schools, roads, bridge repair, and public buildings. For whatever reason, our current local legislators have a tradition of boycotting it, but the truth of the matter is the bonding bill keeps property taxes low. It's cheaper than a levy, for example. We just don't have the commercial tax base like other counties have, like, say, Anoka County. As a result, homeowners pay an undue property tax burden here. Right now, we have to sort of lobby Republican and Democratic legislators in other districts to fund our priorities. And I hope to change this, to be in the thick of things for the next bonding bill by building relationships and partnerships across the aisle. Secondly, I'll work to secure funding for mental health counselors in ISD 728. And thirdly, I believe it's finally time to eliminate Minnesota's Social Security income tax and we'll talk more about that later. And lastly, if elected, I would oppose Representative Novotny's abortion bill, HF 2180, that creates extra legal requirements for clinics offering contraception, miscarriage, and abortion care. Some women I've talked to need that procedure, they've told me, after a miscarriage. And according to public testimony, this bill would restrict access to that procedure in rural Minnesota.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Melissa. My name is Paul Novotny. I'm a graduate of the Elk River High School. I've lived here all my life. After completing college, I was hired at the Princeton Police Department, then went shortly thereafter to the Sherman County Sheriff's Office, where I've served out the rest of my career. I was a use of force instructor and firearms instructor, and did about 10 years of the 30-plus years as investigations. I was probably the world's worst drug undercover investigator, but I did go on to have a illustrious career after that. That has really played into the events that have happened at the state capitol since being elected in February 2020. I retired from the sheriff's office in May of 2020, and I was reelected in a normal election in the fall of 2020. I currently serve on the Public Safety, Judiciary, Health and Human Services Policy Committee, and I was selected by my fellow caucus members to be an assistant minority member. Most importantly about me, I've been married for 27 years to my beautiful wife, Nicole, and I have 2 adult daughters. My priorities at the next session are to return the budget surplus to the people that actually paid for the budget surplus that is there now. The second is going to be common sense public safety reform. And by that I mean we need to refocus the state and get the focus of the criminal justice system back on fighting crime and standing up for victims. Third, as everyone has said here, we need to change the way we do business at the state. Additionally, I want to do a change of the process how we do budgeting. Currently, we do 2-year budget cycles. So you want to tell me that you can predict the budget 3 years into the future at the start of a session? That's crazy. We need to do 1-year cycles so we can take the whiplash or the high and lows out of the budgeting cycle. I want to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. All right, second question is around the state tax surplus. So in May of 2022, the state legislature identified a proposal known as the 4-4 deal that would spend down some of the state's surplus. The plan includes tax cuts, spending and reserves. In your opinion, what is the most important part of the proposal? I'll start with Eric.
Thank you. We are overtaxed in this state. And despite a tax surplus, surplus meaning more tax is confiscated from hardworking individuals, families, and businesses than is needed to fund the government. Despite a surplus, the majority and Governor Walz these last 2 years was demanding a 20-cent per gallon gas tax increase. Could you imagine gas prices where they are, having to pay another 20 cents on top of that? And it's unbelievable. It's a divorce from reality that we need more tax collection in the state of Minnesota. The most important aspect is to slash taxes across the board. Minnesotans are being crushed with taxes in this state. Businesses are leaving, people are leaving. We need to become competitive, and we can if we cut taxes across the board, not with one-time Walz checks gimmicks, but with deep, permanent tax cuts for everybody.
Diane?
Well, I see the state tax surplus as something positive. I would actually use it to fund need-based scholarships and apprenticeships like our labor unions, and use tax incentives to companies to manufacture goods here, right here in Minnesota, and fund tiny homes and alike to address affordable housing crisis. And although not endorsed, I would fund our farmers so that they can pass on their farms to the next generation. And most importantly, cut the debt in Minnesota and use the surplus to cut the debt. And also, support building the Northern Light Express, and this would generate millions in revenue and infrastructure jobs.
Thank you. Walter?
You know, when you go to the store and you're given a total due and you provide some cash that's more than what you're due, you expect to get your change back. And if the guy on the other side of the till didn't give you your change, there would be a problem, and you wouldn't just walk away, right? Yeah. That is what we're talking about here with the state budget surplus. This is money that was never intended to be in the hands of government, but now that they got it, they've decided they're going to do something with it. That is not the appropriate action to take. I agree with Eric Lucero that we ought to be engaged in tax cuts that return the state budget surplus to those who paid it in. I think that would be the morally appropriate thing to do under any circumstances, but it's especially morally appropriate in the context of an economy where we are all suffering. I don't care how well you were doing before. Everybody's tightening their belts now. In the face of this inflation that was not written in the stars, but the result of bad policy decisions like shutting down the state, closing down businesses, closing down churches and schools, printing an unprecedented trillions of dollars at the federal level. All of these choices bear fruit, and that fruit is the inflation that we are suffering under right now. And in order to ease that tension, we ought to give this money back to the people who paid it.
Sonja?
Regarding the state tax surplus, with all things considered, the legislature needs to decide where allocating these dollars makes the most sense. I do not equate surplus to mean a spending spree. Just like families set aside money for emergency funds, the state needs to do the same. Using these funds to reinvest back into servicing Minnesotans shows that we value our communities. This year, money from the surplus was used to replenish the Minnesota Unemployment Insurance Program. This in turn helps to keep businesses' unemployment insurance tax rates flat and also have funds available for this program when they are needed. Without knowing all the variables at this given time, I would support a balanced approach, which would include giving a third of the budget reserve back to the people. A third, again, like we said, a third was tax cuts, a third goes into the balanced reserve, and the other third would go into investing in priority issues such as health care and education. Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. If I've learned anything in my time at the legislature is that you need to read past the bold print. So often the bills will say something to the effect of, 444, we're going to give 4 back. Actually, it wasn't 4-4, it was 4-4-4. We were going to save 4, we were going to spend 4, and we were going to give 4 in tax cuts. It sounded really good on the surface. The tax cuts weren't actually tax cuts that you think it's going to be tax cuts. It was going to be tax credits mostly for renters. We were going to spend 4. We were going to put $4 billion into, most of it, the 2 biggest spending departments that we have already, and that would have raised the base budget the next time we do a budget. It would have been catastrophic looking at what we have coming forward. Just 2 days ago, Bloomberg's, not a right-leaning news organization by any means, Bloomberg's said the chance of an economic recession coming are 100%. Okay? The 444 bill we had was going to spend $12 billion of surplus. We don't even have the $12 billion in surplus to spend yet. Getting on with what Eric said about the gas taxes, we had to get proposal for the gas tax and then we find out the gas taxes spike. But we also were going to, they wanted to also tie gas prices into inflation. We've had 10% inflation this year. So not only will we had rising gas taxes, we would have had additional rising in gas taxes, and that would have compounded every year. That would have been disastrous for our economy more than it is. Let's get competitive. The states around us are cutting their tax rates. Let's cut our sales tax, let's cut our income tax, let's cut our property taxes.
Chad?
Thank you. I do agree that if we're running surpluses, it means that we're overtaxed and we should look for opportunities for tax cuts. But I also realize that we can't point fingers of suspicion at every different direction, because the reality is there's sacred cows in the Republican caucus and there's sacred cows in the Democratic caucus that are preventing us getting meaningful tax cuts sometimes. So there's going to have some give and take to get there, but I would be willing to enter into that debate to get lower taxes because we keep running surpluses. Regarding the current surplus, we could consider tax rebates, or we could we could use some of the surplus to begin to eliminate the Social Security income tax in Minnesota. But finally, another priority of mine that's close to my heart is I'd like to secure mental health funding for counselors for ISD 728. We really need them. Like most dads, I watched in horror and sadness last summer when I saw mass shootings and when they made headlines. With a 13-year-old at Sauk Middle School, I decided I had to do something about it. So I talked to teachers, staff, parents, and ISD 728. In ISD 728, for example, we have a student body of roughly 14,000 students, and 10% of them, about 1,400 students, are experiencing some type of mental health crisis. We can pray after a tragedy, or we can work to prevent one. And so in that sense, I prefer using some of the budget surplus to earmark some mental health counselors, professionals for our school district. In a K-12 budget, I should add.
The next question is around Social Security tax. So thanks for that lead in a little bit there, Chad. Part of last year's plan was to eliminate state tax on all Social Security income. Do you agree with this type of tax policy? Why or why not? I'm going to go to Diane.
I do agree. I do propose a tax cut for retirees, but on the exception that it's based on life expectancy, because it doesn't make sense to tax on Social Security checks. With the increases in life expectancy, eventually the age where a person receives Social Security tax-free must be increased. So, however, I would hold it off only when it's a necessity, and because if we don't do so, it will lead to deficits. But for now, if we do a tax cut for retirees, this will help offset inflation and put more money back into the pockets of retirees. Thank you.
Many years, Republicans have been fighting to cut taxes on Social Security, not to cut, to eliminate. And I seem to recall that it was 14 other states were taxing Social Security several years ago when we were fighting this in the legislature. Now I believe it's approximately only 11 states. So we are one of only approximately 11 states that are taxing Social Security. It's immoral. People work their entire life, are taxed their entire life, just to be taxed again in retirement. I firmly believe in dignity in retirement. And a tax on Social Security is an attack on the dignity that people deserve. And so we absolutely need to eliminate it. Unfortunately, it continues to be used as a political negotiating weapon by the majority party right now. And that's the reason why we haven't been able to pass it. And it's unfortunate because in this time of increased inflation, which is eroding the ability for people to pay their bills, especially when they're on fixed incomes and Social Security, now is the time. It should have already been done by now, to be honest. And we need to continue to fight. So absolutely, the question is, do I support it? 100%. We need to eliminate the tax on Social Security.
Sonja?
Thank you. And also, I support saving Minnesotans money by eliminating the tax on Social Security benefits. This was an area of agreement last year, but unfortunately, it did not pass due to the gridlock in St. Paul. This was unfinished business. I would again support eliminating the Social Security tax. Thank you.
Walter?
I would echo the points already made regarding the nature of what Social Security is and where you're at in life by time you actually get it. Yeah, you've paid a few taxes by then. I think you've paid your fair share at that point. And so the idea that we're going to take this benefit, this entitlement that is intended to ease the pain and intended to support you in your old age, and we're going to take a little bit of that too, just to get one last bite off of the apple, is morally repugnant in my view. And so I think clearly there is bipartisan agreement to get it done. I think it's only a matter of time. In fact, I'm very confident that it's probably the first thing that will come out of the Minnesota House once the 2023 legislative session starts. And I'm very much looking forward to it.
Well, just taking a straw poll here, I would predict that no matter who's elected in this panel, that Social Security income tax is going to be eliminated. But I'll give the last hurrah to my friend Paul here next. I just turned 50 this year, and when you turn 50, you start talking your financial plan a little bit more. You get an AARP card in the mail. And then you go make calculations, and you see that you have you're going to be paying Social Security tax. And literally, imagine this, because this is what I imagined. You lend your car to a friend to use for a while, and when he brings back your keys, he hands you a bill for using it correctly. And that's kind of what Social Security income tax feels like to me. And I have no idea how that bill ever got done. I researched it, and I think it was passed in 1985 or something like that. But it should be eliminated. It's also a great opportunity to help retirees in these inflationary times today and beyond.
Thank you, John. Well, ditto to everybody. But I would like to, and I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but the House Republicans tried to bring a standalone bill to the floor. It was denied. We had a bill that would have got this done during session. It was denied because they wanted to use it as part of negotiation in the omnibus bills at the end. And this is why omnibus bills are so bad, because it's always you can have what you want, but it's going to cost you something else. I signed on to the bill both years that I've been, both sessions that I've been in the House, and I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. The next question is around THC legalization. So this is a little bit longer question. If you need me to repeat it, please ask me. Included in last session's omnibus bill was an amendment that exempted cannabinoids derived from hemp from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Schedule, aka the legalization of products with THC from legally certified hemp can now be manufactured, distributed, and sold in Minnesota in 5 milligram increments. The legislation passed without a requirement for licensing, taxation, or quality control. What, if anything, should the legislature do during the next session to amend this new law, which has been described as unintentionally legalizing weed? So I am going to go to Eric.
Unintentionally legalizing something. Isn't that an amazing term? The legislative process is supposed to be deliberative. We have committees. Legislation is supposed to go before the relevant committees. You're supposed to have testifiers for and against various bills. It's supposed to be a very transparent and public process. But this is the greatest example, the greatest recent example that can be shown why omnibus bills and backdoor deals, the consolidation of power between, while the House of Representatives has 134 people, narrowing it down to 2 or 3 people in a room, making decisions, tucking things into bills. And it's amazing to me. I was one of the legislators, and I think most in the legislature were shocked to learn that this was passed. Now, I voted against the omnibus bill because I can't stand omnibus bills, but this passed in an omnibus bill that most didn't know about. So, I mean, it's just an amazing failure of government, an amazing failure of transparency and accountability. What should be done? Well, I don't know if this is not an area, I don't sit on the committees of this, it wasn't even heard in the committees as far as I'm aware. So I don't have a lot of background on this. And so what we need to at least do it right, and maybe that's a full repeal, have a conversation and do it right. I'm open to however best we can tackle this, but we definitely see an example of a failure of people finding out and have, how was it termed, accidental or unintentional law passed. So thank you.
Diane?
Thanks, Melissa. Well, with the legalization of THC and edibles, I see it as a positive. We can use the tax revenue, which can generate $45 million per year, and help preserve our great outdoors and combat global warming. We can do this by keep building alternative energy sources such as windmills and solar panels. Those who have been charged with small amounts of THC should be released from jail, as Biden did for 6,500 inmates, and assist them with the legal help to have it expunged, to have the opportunity, equal opportunity to succeed and contribute to this state. Additional tax revenues received should also be used to build maintenance clinics and rehab facilities to lessen the cost of jails imprisoning drug users. Thank you.
So there's two things to speak to here. First of all, the process of how we got to this point, and then separately the issue itself. And so in regards to process, echoing off of what Eric Lucero said, how can we say that we have representative democracy, that we have government by the consent of the governed, when the people you elect don't even know what they're passing? Okay, and we can point fingers to individual legislators and say, well, you should be going through all, I don't know how many pages were in it, but 900 pages in an omnibus bill and know every single detail of what it does. But what this really speaks to is a process which doesn't allow a reasonable person to know what it is that they're doing. You know, these are relatively smart people on both sides of the aisle who get elected to these positions to consider public policy. The idea that they didn't know what they were doing is a testament to the process through which they were doing it, rather than to the merits of the issue itself. Regarding the merits, you know, I come from a libertarian persuasion. As I've gotten older, as I've raised a family, as I've taken on more serious roles in the workforce, I've drifted more and more in the conservative direction. And when I think about the challenges that this presents to employers, you know, I manage a workforce of guys who got to come in and operate equipment. And if they've been partaking, that's going to be a problem. Do I really want to make that easier? Not necessarily. My district is not one that is particularly keen on moving in this direction. And so my tendency would be to roll this back. But as to the particulars, your description of what the bill does, not a pot expert. So we need to look at this seriously through a deliberative process that actually allows us to pause, learn, and vote according to our values.
And again, we touched on the subject of the single subject legislation. You can debate bills, talk about bills for what they are. You know what's in them. Without that, we're going through bills, complex process of government. There's room for improvement here. In that area, Minnesota did legalize medical marijuana way back in 2014. This year, edibles with small dose hemp-based THC were made legal through the omnibus bill for adult recreational use. We need to start establishing legal and safe adult use cannabis that will impact public health, criminal justice, and business. By legalizing adult use cannabis, we can start to address the current injustices and inequalities in our legal system so that law enforcement can focus on more important issues. Also, legalizing cannabis allows for businesses to open up and to flourish, and we're also looking at the economic opportunity for many. Thank you.
I did vote against it. I knew it was coming. Being on health, the Health and Human Services policy, didn't know it was coming. Found it extremely interesting that it was never brought up to public safety or judiciary. The business plan was to sneak it through. And the main sponsors of the bill, Representative Winkler and Hdson, have given several interviews spiking the ball because they snuck this through. That was part of their plan. They didn't want to do the taxation because they knew that that would require extra hearings. Has it been as bad as it was going to possibly be? We don't know yet. It took a long time for Colorado to figure out how bad legalization was in their state, and they've seen that. It's supposed to solve all your problems. It's not. It doesn't solve all your problems. As we look forward, the problems that we do have, access by minors, driving under the influence, potency monitoring, all the things that we should be looking at of all the issues that's most important. The one thing that the DFL wants to talk about is how to tax it. It's so frustrating, and this is just another case. I've asked in committee hearings several times on different subjects, is there anything that you would not legalize as long as the state gets a cut? And, I think that's a terrible standard that we should be governing by. As long as the state gets a cut, it's good. Thank you.
I don't know much about this legislation, honestly, because it was a spaghetti that kind of got it to become a law. But I do have a comment about 20 years ago when I got out of college, I worked for the Minnesota State Senate for a while. And back then, Republicans and Democrats would co-sponsor bills in both chambers. And they used to say that the Minnesota State Senate in committee is state government at work, because it's in the committee where ideas like THC get vetted out and they get challenged and they get explored. I don't know how we get back there, but I can hear a bipartisan appeal here that might be a good thing to do in the future. But getting back to the question of THC, anecdotally, I know a person that uses those gummies for his back in place of Advil and Tylenol. I haven't seen any adverse effects. He still swears as much as he used to when we go fishing. But I do think to be Representative Novotny is right to have the concern on the impact to society outside of the taxation realm. And I guess time will tell, and we should monitor it.
Great, thank you. So the next question is around alternative energy sources. There is a tremendous focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions or decarbonizing the energy sector, such as electric, natural gas, and transportation. What are your thoughts about transitioning to low-carbon energy sources and the implications for residential and commercial customers over the next 5 years? I'm going to go over to Diane to kick it off.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. So I am for renewable energy and combating climate change. I would keep investing in clean energy to decrease our carbon footprint with wind, water, and solar and biomass. I would propose tax incentives for car companies to build here. We don't just want the chips. Let me explain. Tesla bought Purvix manufactured innovative auto parts to help the transition in sustainable energy and partnered with Talon Metals for nickel needed for batteries in electric cars. With tax incentives, companies like Tesla or Chrysler will consider building their electric cars here if they are affordable, like the Model T for Ford was built 115 years ago. As they pass environmental tests, electric cars would be sold here for an affordable price. Like casinos, we don't just want the chips, we want the full house.
I love clean water and clean air. And I suspect if I were to ask that question for the audience, every single person would agree. Unfortunately, what we see here as part of the national narrative is that energy policy must be changed, but it's been cloaked with a faulty premise, and that is humans are changing the globe's climate. The Earth's climate has been changing for thousands of years. And I'm also a strong proponent of efficiency and innovation. I have nothing against electricity. I have nothing against electric cars. But what I am against is the use of child slave labor in the mining of the minerals that go into the metals for the batteries and the solar panels. And we've tried to have a conversation on the House floor to make sure that any battery or solar panel was certified child slave labor free. That conversation was stopped because of unfortunately, a greater desire by the majority to push forward wind and solar above all else. I'm in favor of the all of the above approach. That includes nuclear, clean coal, and natural gas. I've been the chief author trying to repeal the current moratorium in place on nuclear power in Minnesota. Europe and Asia are moving forward with nuclear power plants. Why? Because they're 100% carbon free and they're incredibly effective at clean, cheap, and reliable energy. That's the objective. Clean, cheap, and reliable. And unfortunately, we've seen the opposite of that with this narrative to push electricity or electric vehicles and so forth And here's the dirty little secret. The total cost of ownership isn't there. It's being subsidized heavily by the taxpayers through tax credits and other incentives. And so the total cost of ownership isn't seen by the free market.
Sonia?
Thank you. As one of the fastest warming states in the nation, we cannot ignore the effects of climate change, both on our state and our local infrastructure. We have a long legacy of protecting and investing in our natural resources. I will work to ensure we have clean air, water, and soil for the years to come. We value our natural resources and recognize we need to be stewards of the land. I have taken my kids to the North Shore, to Mille Lacs, to Minnehaha Falls, and to Beebe Lake. I want to see my grandchildren and the future generations be able to do the same. Currently here in the Midwest, we use a mix of energy sources somewhere around coal at 32%, wind at 27%, nuclear at 16%, natural gas at 23%, and solar at 1.5%. That changes any given day, but that's just an average. Right now, we need to have that mix while we work towards renewable, reliable energy. Innovation allows for us to access untapped and unrealized human and natural potential. In addition to transitioning Minnesota to renewable resources, this will have a positive impact on the global climate crisis, as well as creating thousands of jobs for Minnesotans, especially in greater Minnesota. We need to create strong incentives for businesses, farmers, and families to make this transition. Minnesota has a plan for a 100% clean energy future by 2040. Thank you.
You know, having a plan to transition to an unproven technology is not much of a plan. You know, the future that I want for my children is for them to flip a switch and for the lights to come on, for them to turn on the thermostat and for the heat to come out of the register. That's the future I want for my kids. I want them to live. I want them to survive. And I think too frequently when we talk about the environment and climate change, we do so in a context that ignores why those things are important. They're important because we live here and we'd like to continue to. And we'd like to leave a planet that our children can prosper in. And so in order to do that, we need energy. It powers literally everything. To the extent that the price of energy goes up, everything we buy, everything we engage in, everything we do becomes more expensive. Energy needs to be first and foremost affordable. And in order to do that, it needs to be abundant. It also needs to be provided in a manner that is reliable. Those are the priorities. Now, if we can do that, speaking to the all of above approach, if we can do that and make it cleaner and better for the environment, fantastic. But there's a priority there. We have to have affordable, abundant, reliable energy first, and then worry about how clean it is second. And to that end, the idea that we have a moratorium in Minnesota on nuclear energy is absolutely absurd. There have been, two major nuclear disasters in history, Chernobyl and Fukushima. Fukushima, I just learned that it wasn't even a problem with the nuclear equipment. It was having to do with the cooling system that was taken out during a tsunami. So, the technology is proven. It works every day across the globe, and it provides clean energy. We should lean into that.
Thank you. Now, I've heard a couple echoes of a couple different things that I didn't quite understand, but I think I want to summarize my thoughts like this. Do we all remember high school history class with this concept of manifest destiny? Remember that? Where we're going to connect our country from the east to the west? Well, we wouldn't be able to do that if the government didn't invest something into the technologies like railroads and locomotives to get there. And I'm pretty sure that we're all happy that we did connect our continents at that time. So with that being said, I think we have to support and support alternative energy sources. So I pretty much support all alternative energy sources, including nuclear. In fact, if as soon as I can buy a truck that can power and has the mileage to tow my boat to Leech Lake to launch it, I probably will get one. But when we talk about alternative energy sources, as it intersects with state law and policy. I favor incentives, not mandates. People should be able to choose when it's the right time, if it's the right time for them to participate in the clean energy economy. And that's why I also support mining on the Iron Range, because we can either get the nickel and the copper and the ore there or in China. And I prefer it right here in our backyard.
Thank you. Market forces will pick the best next energy if we let it, and if the government gets out of the way of picking the winners and losers. These changes to solar and wind, those are not consumer driven, they're politically driven. The green energy alternatives that we have, aside from wind and solar, if we gave them the same tax advantages or didn't give the advantages to other people, we could look at those. You know, for example, how many people in the room know that the methane capture electricity generation that was going on at the landfill just got turned off at the beginning of the month? So approximately 2,500 to 3,000 homes that were powered by captured methane for basically for free energy, that's not going to be used anymore because captured methane doesn't get the same tax advantages and credits that wind and solar do. So for a couple of cents different per kilowatt, now that methane is just being flared off, just going up into the atmosphere without getting electricity out of it for a couple cents different. That's where we need to let the market decide what's best, and then look at the California mandates that our governor wants to do, and then look at California. Just 2 weeks ago, they said, you will have an electric car in the state of California by 2035. 2 days later, they said, oh, by the way, don't plug in your electric car because we don't have enough electricity. Okay? What are you going to do when they tell you you can't charge your car, or you've used too much electricity? You went to the lake. How dare you? You should have stayed home. Or look at the hurricane. How are you going to get out when you can't charge your car?
Great. Thank you to the candidates. We have gone through all of the Government Relations Committee questions, so we have collected some from the audience. I cannot guarantee, based on the time schedule, that we'll get through all of them, but we'll start from the top and again go through, alternate each person. So the first question that we received is, should there someday be a new and equally threatening pandemic, which if any mandates taken during the COVID pandemic, do you feel were beneficial and should be again put in place if the pandemic spreads the same way? So I'm going to read that again because I kind of stumbled in the center there. So, should there someday be a new and equally threatening pandemic, which, if any mandates taken during the COVID pandemic, do you feel were beneficial and should be again put in place if the pandemic spreads the same way? So I'm going to go over to Diane.
Well, with anything, there's always protocols or SOPs. And so if there was another pandemic and the CDC guidelines says it, we're going to follow it because we're going to put our trust in our doctors and in our nurses and in our government that they did the scientific studies, and that if they say that we got to hit this protocol or go back to mass or whatever we need to do, we should follow it because we believe in our government and we want to follow scientific reasoning and yes.
Our constitutional republic is dependent upon checks and balances. What we saw with the abuse of emergency powers by Governor Walz was the antithesis of our constitutional system. It was unilateral decisions absent any checks and balances. And it was very frustrating. Government does not own us. I'm a firm believer in medical freedom and individual liberty. And so we should never have that again. We absolutely need to reform Chapter 12 of Emergency Powers. And it's really frustrating to me that you have one man unilaterally deem Planned Parenthood and booze essential while deeming churches non-essential and slamming their doors closed. That is unbelievable. We shall never allow that to happen again. We absolutely need to ensure our constitutional checks and balances, and we need a wholehearted rewrite of Chapter 12, which was abused by Governor Walz and the Democrat majority.
Sonja.
Thank you.
And no clapping, sorry.
Okay, so again, with the pandemic, this is something we'll be studying for years. It's not when, or it's going to be if, not if, it's going to be when we have another pandemic. So what can we learn from this? What can we do together? Again, we're going to be studying this for years. Are mandates right? Are they not right? How does it affect people? What's the economic impact? What's the health impact? What's the educational impact? We can't look at these things in a silo. Everything operates as interdependent. I trust our government. I trust the guidelines that are put in place by our elected officials. This is something we come together and do. We draw up laws. We trust our government. We move forward. I trust our scientists, and I trust our healthcare. Thank you.
You know, it's often said that members of a particular political party march in lockstep with whoever's at the top, whoever's leading the party. This is an example of where I part with former President Donald Trump. I do not believe the response to the pandemic was appropriate, especially as it manifests here in Minnesota. Democracy was canceled in Minnesota. You had the governor crown himself king and dictate to 6 million people whether or not they could go to work, open their business, send their kids to school, go to church. And as Eric points out, there were exceptions. If you had a small or medium-sized business, which I'm sure there's folks in this room who do, you had to shut down. Walmart didn't. Target didn't. Home Depot didn't. You know who else didn't? Minnesota's largest candy store. You know why? Personal friend of Tim Walz. It's absolutely absurd that we're going to grant that type of unilateral monarchy power to one person and still call ourselves Americans. It should never happen again. And I want to speak to this point about, trusting the science, trusting the experts, believing our government. Boy, oh boy. Listen, there's a relationship that you have with the experts in your life. Your doctor, your accountant, your lawyer. These are people who, they're the experts, genuinely. They went to school, you didn't. They know their business. But the advice that they give you is advice. If you don't agree with your doctor, you can go to another one to get what we call a second opinion. Why? So that you can make the decision based on your values about what's the best course of action in your circumstances. That's what was lost in all of this, and we're going to get it back.
All right, I just want to submit or say one more time as a reminder, please refrain from clapping and talking during the candidates being asked the questions. Sorry, Chad, go ahead.
Thank you, Walter. I couldn't disagree with him more. January 6th was an attempt by a president to crown himself king. COVID was public. Public went to public. COVID went into public. And so the best thing we could do is prevent it from spreading. And I had 4 people that I know that died. And a simple little isolation could have prevented it from spreading more people. So I totally just disagree with it. Regarding the next pandemic, I think we learned some valuable lessons. As long as we can come up with a protocol that's uncomplicated and simple to understand, to keep our loved ones safe when we go to church, safe when we go to public, there's no reason why we should have drastic and draconian measures of stopping ourselves from worshiping. But there could be other reforms that could take place. But I did appreciate when I would go grocery shopping, because I did unfortunately get COVID twice. But I do appreciate the people trying to prevent the spread, because we don't allow people to drink and drive and go into public, and we shouldn't try to spread a virus in the public. But for the future, we'll have to learn from these past mistakes to move forward into the future.
Thank you. As we are a little separated from the crisis and have a chance to look at the data, I think if you look at the countries that locked down totally, as opposed to the countries that didn't lock down, states that were really restrictive as opposed to states that weren't really restrictive, in the end, the numbers were pretty much the same. What frustrated me being new to the Senate, or not new to the legislature, was that there was no collaboration. We came together, I had just gotten there. First day was February 14th, and the pandemic started about March 15th, so it was there about a month. And what was really frustrating for me is when we didn't know what was going to be, we all came together, we made changes, we agreed that until we really get an idea on this, we should probably take some precautions. We got emergency funding, we got supplies put away, there was some planning going on. And the emergency powers are given for that tidal wave that's coming at you, not for handling flooding. A year into the crisis, when we had the legislature set up, where we had communications established, nothing changed. We still had that single person control, and if I've learned anything about working in the legislature, is that we all do better when everybody else comes together. Bills get better. I work with the other side of the aisle on bills. We all can add something or make it better and clarify it. And with that single person control, there wasn't any opportunity for that. The legislature should have been brought in and consulted, and that's really what was frustrating for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to close the session tonight by giving everybody an opportunity to kind of summarize their thoughts and maybe respond to anything that wasn't asked. And again, you'll get 2 minutes to do that. So, 2 minutes. So, Eric, I'm going to start.
I was going to say, can I start with that?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead, Paul? We've already started on that end, so go ahead, Paul. Yeah, go the other way.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you to the Chamber for putting on this forum and allowing the voters to hear from all of our candidates. Thank you for everyone that came tonight and for those of you viewing at home. It's been the honor of my life to represent this area that I was born and raised in. All of my family is still here. If reelected, I will continue to work day in and day out for the best interest of all the citizens, and I believe I have done my best to do that, represent all the citizens just like I did in my 30-plus year law enforcement career. My name is Paul Novotny, and I hope you vote for me November 8th.
Chad.
See, Paul said we're the best would be last tonight, and he never lied. Blessed to. Anyways, thank you, Chamber, for inviting us to come here. As you can tell, that we all have some passionate things that we believe in. But at the end of the day, I believe that we're all Americans. And if we can find that place to find common ground, nothing is impossible for us to accomplish. And so these are the types of activities I think that we can use to bring us together. Tonight, in tonight's debate, I highlighted 2 areas that I diverged from Mr. Novotny on. But I go fishing with him, and I hang out with him. In fact, we talk to each other in all the community events. Wouldn't you agree? Yep, and we do. And so there's that esprit de corps that you get in public service. And if we can find that place, that'd be great. And stay away from extremism. Extremism has no place when it's not based on fact. Then you can shout from the rooftops what you believe in. So with that being said, I desire in my heart to serve this community. I pledge, if I'm elected, to do my best. And I'll be an open door for learning new ideas, and I believe in calling balls and strikes. And I'd like to build relationships and partners to get things done for our area. Have a great night.
Thank you, Elk River Chamber, for putting on this event. I hope everyone has found it educational and edifying. Thank you for coming out. Extremism. It's an interesting word, isn't it? It's an interesting concept. It's relative, right? If you find yourself in the middle of a burning building, you're going to want to get some extreme distance from it, right? I think that's kind of where we find ourselves. We need to get extremely away from the status quo in a wide variety of ways. Perhaps the most essential way is the conversation that we started with here tonight, which is changing how we govern here in Minnesota, making it more deliberative. And that is going to, ironically perhaps, have a moderating effect. Look, I'm a conservative. I'm an activist. I don't shy away from that. That's right out front. But I'm not going to get my way by tossing my weight around. I'm going to get my way by persuading people that the ideas that I'm bringing to the table are the best ideas for them and their family and are in sync with their values. That's what the legislature is supposed to do. It's currently not, and that's a product of process. And that's something we can change on day one. And as a result of that, these conversations that we have on issues will start to go back to the people who they affect, rather than the particular interests or folks in positions of institutional power who benefit from keeping the details hidden so that they get unintentionally passed. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Chamber and for everyone being here this evening. Thank you for ensuring our democracy. This year we have so much on the ballot. We are living in a time of extreme division, and that is also reflected here in the choice of candidates. I believe that we represent very different values, and we have a different vision of where our community and where our state is headed. I'm running to be a voice for you. I'm running to be a voice of compassion. I'm running to be a voice of reason, to be part of something that seeks to build us up rather than tear us down, something that seeks to unite rather than divide, and to find common ground solutions rather than using problems to our advantage. I want us to expand rights for women, for children, the LGBTQ community, and all of us living here in this community. I want to support teachers, healthcare workers, and safety officers to reduce gun violence, to expand access to voting, and to protect a person's right to choose. I'm running because it's time we put people before politics. I'm asking you to use your voice and vote November 8th for compassion, clarity, and common ground. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, everybody. Elk River Area Chamber of Commerce, everybody that came out tonight, and everybody that is watching over the live stream and in the reruns in the coming days and weeks. We live in the greatest country in God's green earth. We have a constitutional republic that was architected by people that believed in individual liberty. I firmly believe that that is being threatened by many of the policies that are being promoted today. The best way to protect our individual liberty, the ability for each person to self-determine the outcomes of their own life, to pursue happiness, as each of us defines differently. We don't have the same definition of what makes us happy, is to shrink the size, scope, and power of government and to increase the individual. And if we do that, happiness will be the natural result for everybody. Federalism is the system of our government. And I firmly believe in federalism. Federalism means allowing decisions to be made at the local level rather than one size fits all at the state or national level. One of the things that I've been saying for years is I'm fighting to return meaning to the word independent in independent school districts. A couple topics we haven't spoken about tonight are parental authority and the ability for parents to make decisions over their children's education. I am fighting for that. Unfortunately, we have several school districts that I have been fighting my entire time in the legislature that are at the bottom in per pupil funding. I will continue to fight for education funding reforms that fix the adverse impact that's happening to our community. And then pro-life, nothing else can exist without first having life. And I am very
Eric,
much passionate
Eric, I'll
about
ask you to
protecting life.
stop.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Elk River Chamber of Commerce, and thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And I want to ask every and each one of you, the question is, not are we better off than we were 2 years ago, but rather, where will we be in 4 years? Where will we be in 4 years? Many will argue the tax cuts alone will stimulate our economy. It will not. It will actually increase future deficits. And many here also in the past have supported the January 6th insurrection. And many are against health care coverage for all. But I offer an alternative to the status quo. If elected, I will use the surplus to funds to invest and generate revenues, lowering taxes in the long run. I will encourage businesses to open up in our state through tax incentives, and I will support a healthcare program that parallels others in countries such as Sweden and Canada. Vote for me on November 8th, Diane for StateSenate.com. Let's get back to work, Minnesota. Thank you, everybody.
So we would like to thank all the candidates for taking the time this evening to come and educate our visitors here. So if we could give them a round of applause. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming out again tonight. And this will be rebroadcast on ERTV 180 as well as the Chamber's website and social media channels. So again, thanks for coming out. Have a good night.